All right. So, for those of you who may be unaware, Giving Institute has been responsible for putting this Giving USA report out since about 1965. We've got a phenomenal group of financial supporters who donated to make this happen. And what this report does and what it does not do is important. We're recording donations to charity. At the close of this session, we'll fill in with some things that aren't recorded as charity, things like crowdfunding and social impact investing. But this looks at giving over time and assesses the trends, both in terms of how much is given and by whom and where it goes. This past year, the headline is that $592 billion was donated. This is a big number and surpassed what was raised the previous year, both in terms of real dollars and meaning inflation adjusted dollars and current dollars. 66% of that money came from individuals, specifically, 8% from individuals who left a nonprofit in their bequest, their will, their estate, 7% from corporations, and 19% from foundations. This distribution has been holding steady for the last several years. Um, Over the course of the last 20, the growth in foundations is significant because people have made family foundations. And so roughly half of that figure um, could be construed as gifts from family directed foundations, i.e. individuals, and 8% from people who have died. So you're still looking at upwards of 85% that's coming from people living or deceased. Now, where's it going? Interesting distribution of dollars this year. Once again, we saw religion at less than 30%. Historically, 10 years ago or more, 40 years ago even, religion made up 45, almost even 50% of the total. Um, it's declined as a percentage of the total, still the largest segment. But what's fascinating is that while there used to be a battle between education and healthcare for those cherished second and third positions, human services has dropped into that second place setting, followed by education. And then gifts to grant making foundations comes in third. That's where you get donations to your family foundations, etc. Public society benefit and health round out that top group. Um, and an interesting phenomena, I think, post COVID is that people seem to be focusing their dollars on organizations that really help and impact people at a human and personal level. Now, the interesting thing to note is that focusing on the dark bars, the changes in giving by source, you're looking at an increase in revenue um, that was given away. And you can see that significantly more money, larger changes, were seen in the area of corporations, foundations, and individuals. Bequests took a hit, and one could say that the foundation growth in terms of the this year over the previous year was significantly smaller, but still, nonetheless, with the exception of bequests, everything was positive. When you look at the impact of inflation, you can see that we've got a bit of a change here. Now, the type of organizations that got these gifts, education had a big surge. If you look again at that dark line versus the uh, gold bar the previous year, education basically made up for 2023, as did public society benefit, had a 19% growth rate, international affairs 17, environment, animal 7. significant shift in where the money was going or who experienced great significant growth year over year. Now, when we look at this in terms of inflation adjusted dollars, you'll note that last year's report, while total gifts went up in terms of cash, inflation outpaced that. So in the difference between 23 and 22 was in essence a net negative in terms of purchasing power. And so fortunately, the way the economy turned, the way inflation shifted in this past year, we see this significant growth in the 2024 report. And it's even more impactful when you look at this over time. The line represents current dollars, and the bars represent inflation adjusted dollars. So you can see relative to last year, 2023, um, the current dollars went up, but in terms of inflation adjusted dollars, they went down from the previous year. This year, 2024, that we're reporting on, both the inflation adjusted dollars and current dollars show an increase. Significant note, typically the gold bar lines represent periods of recession. Classically, during a recession, giving has remained flat. The exception was in 2008, 2009, where basically everybody lost a third of their value. Um, and it took a while for that to come back. But we're in a now what I perceive as a steady growth state. Giving by individuals, as you see here, continues to increase. It's the primary source of philanthropy in the country. It's that on which we depend. And you can see again here that in terms of both inflation adjusted and current dollars, we're ahead of the curve. Adjusted for inflation, giving increased by 5.1% in 2024 over the year before. Giving by foundations, the grant making independent community foundations, et cetera, increased to an estimated 101 or 109 billion in 2024. So there was an increase in dollars, but when you look at this in terms of an adjustment for inflation, giving back foundations essentially was flat compared to the previous year. Bequest giving, we've got no control over this. I mean, people are going to die when they're going to die. And you can see how this line squiggles all over the map here over the course of over the decades. So we were down, but one would assume that that may in fact reverse itself in the next year. Wish that people lived longer, but we just don't have any control over that. Giving by corporations, this is fascinating because this shows a rather dramatic increase in corporations, growing by 9.1% for an estimate of $44.4 billion. And when you adjust that for inflation, it's 6%, but still significant. The driving factor behind this essentially was the economy. GDP grew. Corporations historically give about 1% of their pre-tax profits. They had more profitability, they gave more away. So this was a good thing for those of us in the fundraising business. This chart we put together just to show you how by sector or segment these conditions have changed over time. And you see in this light area, individuals have historically represented the strongest segment of giving. Foundations peaked into that second tier here, and then you've got bequests and corporations filling out the balance. In terms of a percentage of the total, as I mentioned earlier, individuals in the past, back in 85, generate 80% of the total. Now they're at 67%. trends in giving over time. This is another strong year for us. You notice that back after COVID, we had a significant increase in giving. People were compelled to do something for those who were suffering. We've not achieved that total, but we have again increased. We're up 35.28 billion from 2023. So this is significant. And in fact, the giving, the generosity, um, was substantial, both again in terms of current dollars and inflation adjusted dollars. So we're quite strong. The takeaway for me is that it seems like we're back to what one would expect. That historically, since 1999, we've been seeing philanthropy run at about 2% of gross domestic product. And so here we are at 2% gross domestic product, and giving went up. Another indicator that when the economy is strong and people are doing better, companies are doing better, there's a benefit to the nonprofit community. The other thing that tracks rather well with major donors is the stock market. They tend to give more when they feel they can because of the appreciated asset at their disposal. They can escape some capital gains tax on that and make a larger impact than what they actually paid for the stock initially. So as you see here, a growth in the S&P 500 correlates with a growth in giving. Individual giving as a percentage of our disposable income, roughly 2%. I've said this before, much to the chagrin of every minister and rabbi, etc., on the planet who talks about the tithe at 10%. We sort of hover around 2. There's room for improvement here. What's interesting to me is that the last time we were at 2% was almost 20 years ago. And so we're just under that mark. I think there's room for us in the industry to do more in the way of storytelling and encourage more people to give more. But that's another story and a slide we'll get into later. The other thing is that corporate giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits got back to 1%. It was at 1% in 2019, but it was covered by inflation. This year it's at 1.1. So again, strong economy, more money, more profitability, greater opportunity to return some of that to the communities in which they reside. So while at the very beginning of our presentation we talked about giving to religion representing now 23%, less than 30% of the total, over time giving to religious organizations has increased when you look at that dotted line of current dollars. The impact in the last few years has been in terms of inflation adjusted dollars, but fortunately this year we generated almost $146 billion in 2024. If you adjust for inflation, there's a decline by 1%. So still an opportunity to see some growth there in the future. Giving to education, here's an area where we had a particular soar. 14% of total giving last year, grew by 13.2% in terms of total dollars. When you adjust for inflation, it's up to 9.9%. Anybody in the university, college, and independent school world, this is resonating strong with you. Let's keep this momentum going and push it on into the future. Human services, this is another one where we saw significant amount of support, again, 14% of the total, but it grew to 91.1 million. Just to inflation, it increased by 2%. So this is strong. Giving to foundations, as I mentioned earlier, was the area where we saw basically flat growth, particularly when you adjust for inflation. It's about 0.5%. It did increase in terms of current dollars over 2023 by 71 billion. Giving the public society benefit. Now, this was an area where again there was growth. Um, Represents a growth by 19.5% up to 66.84 billion. Um, if you adjust for inflation, you can see that we've got a nice curve. Giving to health, uh, 10% of all donations in 2024, and it increased by 5% to 60.5 billion. You adjust that for inflation, you got a growth rate of 2% between 2023 and 2024. But again, like everything else we've looked at, the lines are sloping in the right direction. Arts, culture, and humanities, another place where we saw good growth, 9.5%. In current dollars, 6.5% in inflation adjusted dollars. So people who care about arts, culture, the humanities gave and gave big in the past year, as did giving to international fairs. Well, this doesn't represent a large slice of the pie, only 6% of all donations, but it grew by 17.7% last year in current dollars and 14.3% in inflation adjusted dollars. Giving to environment and animals, another strong sector. 3% of the total that was donated. It grew by 7.7% last year. When you adjust for inflation, about half of that in terms of real spending was the increase was 4.6%. This decades or 5-year span chart shows you how the gifts as a percentage of the total have adjusted over time. Religion over here in 85 at 56% to 25% in 2024. That's probably the biggest story over time. It's followed by giving to grant-making foundations. And then, as I said earlier, the replacement of gifts to human services, where that used to be a battle between higher ed and healthcare. Now, in all of this, there's been a substantial growth of the number of 501c3s. So not only are the number of donations increasing, the dollars increasing, but the number of places they can turn to make their gifts have increased. You'll see that back in just 12 years ago, we're looking at 1,052,495 nonprofits, and now we're up over 1.5 million in 2023. There was a survey done where I think most millennials saw as one of their objectives a desire to create a nonprofit. So we may see this grow even more substantially over time. Now, that summarizes the data from the Giving USA report. What I want to do is spend a little bit of time looking at some other things that you've heard us talk about before, but basically the Fundraising Effectiveness Project at AFP has continually shown that while dollars increase, donors has decreased, and our ability to retain donors decreases. So there's a bit of a headwind in terms of what we're dealing with. And when you look at donors by size of gift, what you see is that the strength last year, 2024, was in what AFP calls the major and the supersized gifts, things in excess of 5%. That's the only place we saw growth. Perhaps it's because those of us in the business are spending time with major gift donors and with leadership annual fund donors. But you'll see that the micro, the small, the mid-size represents 50 plus 30 is 80 plus 15 a significant amount of donors. This group represents 3% of the total, major and supersized. So while the we're losing donors, we're getting fewer people to give more. Long term, if you think about building your major donor pipeline from people who give to you and they make a gift at $100 level or 500 or 1,000 early on, and you want to upgrade them, this could be a problem for us. This is just a visualization of that same chart showing you how many of the donors are represented by those different gift levels. Um, when you look at life cycle, here again is another problem. We're declining in terms of new donors. We're declining in terms of retained donors. Um, our rate of decline is less at the repeat retained donor, those people who've given several years in a row, and the recaptured donors, those people that were able to go back to, may have skipped a year and get back into the fold. We didn't lose as many. We still lost, but not as many. We look at dollars by donor size, and we see the same thing. We lost dollars at the low end, we gained dollars at the high end. That correlates with the earlier chart relative to the donors. This another visualization of the same breakout. By life cycle, where there was good news last year in the fundraising effectiveness project report was in the new retained donors and the repeat retained donors. We had a positive number there. Unfortunately, there was a loss in the number of new donors year over year, and there was a loss in the number of recaptured donors year over year. So all this to say, we're repeating the story. We need to do a better job of stewardship and retention in order to fill that back pipeline. If you ran an obscene progression of dollars increasing and donors decreasing, you get to a point where there might be one person giving everything away. Um, everybody in the call probably wants to know when Mackenzie Scott is going to make a gift to their organization, but that's an unknown, and she's not going to be around forever. Now, significantly, a percentage of the donations that were recorded last year came from the gifts at $1 million and above. In fact, it represented about $12 billion, $12.6 billion from the database that we retained at Visionary Philanthropic Consulting. There was an increase of 5 donors at the $1 million plus level and an increase of $291 million at that level. At the $100 million level, we saw a slight decline, no change in the number of donors, slight decline in the number of dollars, growth of 13 donors at the $50 million and up level for $803 million, grew by 21 at the $10 million level, a delta of 528 million, and a decline of 29 donors over 2023 for negative 90 million. But you can see that this is significant. There are people out there, and of course, the 2 big gifts that were announced this past year to Albert Einstein School of Medicine and to Johns Hopkins, particularly in terms of providing an opportunity for people to go to medical school tuition free so that they in turn would not be burdened with tuition repayment and could potentially provide service at a lower price point to society. Those are all significant things that impact us all. But when you look at the slide from last year, what I'm buoyed by is that in 2023, we saw a real drop off from 2022. In 2022, we had 19 billion, 2023, 12.2 billion, and we were down across the board. So when you go from this dark scenario to where we are this year with some growth, that's a positive thing and something to, I think, to smile about. And I want to acknowledge all those who were involved in these transactions, be they the donors themselves or the members of the philanthropy team that helped get those gifts. Now, we started talking a year ago about the role of benevolence, the confluence between generosity, charity, and benevolence. And we see that again. Crowdfunding is still a major force to be played with. And fortunately, this year, we're beginning to see a distinction between crowdfunding that goes to things that are benevolent and things that are business related. And so the non 501c3 giving estimates for 2024, we had 42 million gifts and $3.3 billion. So that's an increase of 500 million from the previous year. And again, in the donor's mind, these are acts to charity. I refer to the experience here in Florida post hurricane. Somebody experiences damage. They put up a crowdfunding site. I give him $100. He helps repair his roof. I'm thinking of that as a generous act. But since my neighbor is not a 501c3, it doesn't get recorded as such by the IRS. So this is outside the spectrum of what Giving USA reports and records. This year's report from Northern Trust is delayed until November. So I've got last year's slide in here, but what this shows you is how much money is going into DAFs and how much the donor advised funds actually hold. And you can see each year there's been an increase. Still some subtlety in terms of people being generous putting money into a donor advised fund because that's when the charitable event occurs. But once it's there, that DAF is owned by the enterprise that holds it, whether it's a community foundation or Schwab or State Street, et cetera. And oftentimes there's a delay in terms of when that money goes in and when it goes out to do good, positive, charitable work. The other thing that we've been reporting on are those people who want to do good in terms of social impact investing. And this is an area where assets under management continues to grow. It was 1.5 trillion in 2023. It's up to 1.6 trillion now. You think of the earnings potential on that, 1% of that going into social good, whether it's investing in a company or if it's buying a property that can be then used for housing, shelter, or workforce development. Anything that some of our nonprofits are involved in, education is a good and positive thing. But again, outside the realm of what the IRS is going to record and report. So in sum, charitable giving returned to what we would anticipate. If GDP grows and it grows by, stronger than 2%, philanthropy grows. And families continue to make gifts to their foundations and donor advised funds. That's a significant area of growth. Conversely, the situation we're dealing with, the headwind is the total number of donors are declining. The increase in corporate giving, 1% of pre-tax profits, that's good. We don't quite know what the economic environment is going to be like in the next year or the latter half of this year and whether that will continue. There are some things in the offing that might suggest that will. And then the other thing we have to look for is that people are looking at other forms of charity beyond those that we've outlined here in the Giving USA report. And we need to be attentive to that. We may even want to match our giving styles to mirror those that we see in crowdfunding and social impact in investing. So happy to spend this time with you. I want to slide forward. Let's see. We looked at a lot of this. Want to get you to the last Here we go. The slides from Giving Institute, from Giving USA report, are available by going to store.givingusa.org. You can order that if you want. You can contact us. We can help you get access to that. The actual book that'll come out with an even more complete identification of what's going on inside of each sector will be published later in July. But these summary slides are available for you. And what I'd like to do at this point in time is stop and see if there are any questions, and be happy to respond to those with those of you who are here. Just put something in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm happy to reply. One of the questions I heard was, what's the impact of the great big beautiful bill? There's a lot of discussion relative to cuts that are proposed. I spent a fair amount of time on ChatGPT yesterday asking questions. I said, is there actually going to be a decline in federal spending? And the answer that came forth was, and a beautiful graph was created, actually, the cut in government parlance is a reduction in the rate of growth. So government spending will continue to grow, as will spending on Medicaid. However, that provides opportunities for us in the nonprofit industry to respond and ensure that we give people who are interested in the services we provide an opportunity to step up philanthropically. So that's an interesting question. Well, I think we blew through this data rather quickly, and hearing no questions from the audience, we'll provide a summary slide deck for those of you who participated and get that out to you. We'll also put a copy of this recording on the website. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to us if we can be of any help. Visionaryphilanthropy.com is the web address. My email address is scott@visionaryphilanthropy.com. We're happy to work with you and respond to any challenges that you might have on the horizon. And with that, I'll say goodbye and thank you so much for your time and attention.